I just want to say I'm very grateful to Professor Welch for allowing me to participate in this program. It's a great privilege for me to be up here with the folks that you've heard from already. I'm also very grateful to Jeff Bradshaw for allowing me to work on some of this Enoch stuff with him. This is a great opportunity for me to be here to talk about two of my favorite topics. And when I can get this microphone, okay? Enoch and the temple. It is also a great privilege for me to be here with one of the greatest scholars that we have on the Enoch literature, Dr. George Nicholsburg, whose work I have admired for many years. The work of scholars such as Dr. Nicholsburg and also our own Hugh Nibley have opened our eyes to the ancient traditions regarding the figure of Enoch, so that we as Latter-day Saints have come to realize what a wealth of knowledge the prophet Joseph Smith provided us when he produced his inspired renderings of the first several chapters in Genesis, including the greatly expanded story of Enoch. One of the most significant additions to the biblical record in Joseph's revelation on Enoch is that not only Enoch was taken up alive into heaven, as the Genesis passage implies, but also that the entire city of Enoch was eventually received up into heaven as well. Whereas the idea of Enoch as an individual ascending into heaven is common, as we've seen, in the ancient religious literature regarding the patriarch, parallels to the notion of his entire community being translated and taken up as well are not so apparent. In this presentation, I will explore the notion of communal ascent to heaven in ancient Jewish and Christian literature and seek to answer the question, can an entire community ascend to heaven? Do we see this theme in the ancient texts, or is this a complete innovation on the part of Joseph Smith as he sought to unite his followers around an inspiring and unifying goal? Along the way, I will explore the connection between the theme of heavenly ascent and its connections to the temple in the ancient texts. Whether the story involves the earthly or heavenly temple, or both, the sacred meeting point of heaven and earth is almost always either the starting point or the destination of the ascent. In chapter 7 of the book of Moses in the Pearl of Great Price, Joseph Smith provides us with an extensive account of how Enoch built a city, which was called the City of Holiness, or even Zion. We are then told that Zion, in the process of time, was taken up into heaven. Similarly, Moses 7, verse 69 states, "And Enoch and all his people walked with God, and he dwelt in the midst of Zion." That is, God dwelt in the midst of Zion. "And it came to pass that Zion was not, for God received it up into his own bosom. And from thence went forth the saying, Zion is fled." As we are informed that God came and dwelled in Zion, it is probably safe to assume that Enoch's city had a temple. This was Brigham Young's understanding, who stated, "I will say not but what Enoch had temples and officiated therein, but we have no account of it." One of the most intriguing elements of the Joseph Smith translation of Genesis is that this concept of communal ascent is not limited to Enoch's city of Zion. Once Zion has been elevated to the Lord's presence, this establishes a pattern for others to follow. With Enoch's Zion removed from the world, the residue of the people left behind continue to increase in wickedness, a downward spiral that ultimately ends with the coming of the great flood to cleanse the earth of their iniquity. Moses 7:27 informs us that the more righteous living at the time of Enoch and Noah were removed from this dismal situation. "And the Holy Ghost fell upon many, and they were caught up by the powers of heaven into Zion." In an interesting New Testament parallel, the Epistle to the Hebrews mentions the translation of Enoch in his discussion of the faith of the ancients. The author then goes on to mention how Abraham, while he was wandering in the land of promise, living in tents, was waiting for a city with foundations, whose builder and maker is God. The text goes on to imply that all of the patriarchs were seeking to reach or return to a country or a city, a heavenly city. Hebrews 12:22 associates this city with Mount Zion. The author contrasts the experience of the Israelites under Moses and how they were not able to even touch Mount Sinai with that of the followers of Jesus Christ, who are now given full access to Mount Zion. Speaking to the community of Christ Church, the author declares, "But ye are come unto Mount Zion, and unto the city of the living God, and to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn, which are written in heaven." And I'll come back to this subject in a moment. Aquila Lee, who received his PhD from the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, which is where I've just come from, Scotland, argues that the idea about Mount Zion as heavenly Jerusalem was taken up by the early church when they read Psalm 2 together with Psalm 110 as applying to Jesus. Psalm 110:4 is, of course, one of only two passages in the Hebrew Bible that makes mention of Melchizedek. Lee observes that the early Christian church understood Psalm 110:1 to refer to Jesus, who had taken up his throne on Mount Zion at God's right hand. Verse 4 was understood to declare that Jesus' priesthood was related to the priesthood of Melchizedek. This is the connection that the author of Hebrews makes, that Jesus' priesthood is the priesthood of Melchizedek. In a similar vein, Joseph Smith, in his inspired expansion of the Melchizedek pericope in Genesis 14, depicts the priesthood of Melchizedek as following the priesthood of Enoch, which in turn is derived from the order of priesthood of the Son of God. Furthermore, the text says that the men who came unto this priesthood of the order of God were translated and taken up into heaven. Melchizedek, we are told, was a priest after this order and was able to obtain peace in the city he ruled, the city of Salem. As a result, the text says, his people wrought righteousness and obtained heaven, and sought for the city of Enoch, which God had before taken, separating it from the earth, having reserved it unto the latter days, or the end of the world, and hath said and sworn with an oath that the heavens and the earth should come together. The idea of Melchizedek being taken up into heaven is not unknown in the ancient literature. Jim Davila, my PhD supervisor, has noted that in 2nd Enoch, we find the unusual tale of Melchizedek being taken away to paradise during the flood so that he may return and serve as high priest. Additionally, in the Qumran text, known as 11Q Melchizedek and the Songs of the Sabbath Sacrifice, which Dr. Nicholsburg mentioned, Melchizedek appears to be depicted as a high priest who serves in the heavenly temple. Davila describes the trajectory of the figure of Melchizedek in ancient literature as moving from Melchizedek, the human priest-king, to Melchizedek, the god. Of course, this is the trajectory that Joseph Smith describes in his grand revelation of the kingdoms of heaven recorded in Doctrine and Covenants 76. Regarding those who are destined for celestial glory, it says, "They are they into whose hands the Father hath given all things. They are they who are priests and kings, who have received of his fullness and of his glory, and are priests of the Most High, after the order of Melchizedek, which was after the order of Enoch, which was after the order of the only begotten Son. Wherefore, as it is written, they are gods, even the sons of God." Although these parallels are interesting, what we are still not seeing in the ancient texts is the idea of an entire community being taken up into heaven, as described in Joseph Smith's Revelations. There are numerous biblical and pseudepigraphical texts that relate the ascensions of great biblical heroes such as Abraham, Jacob, Levi, Moses, Isaiah, Paul, and others. However, these are all narratives of the ascension of a single exceptional individual allowed to partake in generally a single exceptional experience. Moses, when he ascends to Mount Sinai into the presence of God, leaves the general body of the Israelites down at the bottom of the mountain, and even the 70 specially chosen elders at the halfway point before ascending to the heights. Having said this, although perhaps they may not come to mind as readily as the great stories of the individual ascenders, the motif of the ascent of the community to the heavenly realm is not as difficult to find as it may initially appear. Hugh Nibley, in his book entitled Enoch the Prophet, pulls from Adolf Jelinek's collection of Jewish traditions, Beit HaMidrash, a story of more than 800,000 men who followed Enoch and refused to leave him as he was allowed to be taken up to heaven in a chariot of fire. Although the text does not explicitly depict this large company ascending to heaven together with him, it does state that when the kings of the land came to find these thousands of followers of Enoch, they were not found and were thought to be dead. Although other such accounts regarding Enoch and his followers that parallel the Book of Moses narrative may exist, the remainder of my presentation will focus not on attempting to identify further parallels of this nature, but will highlight examples in early Jewish and early Christian literature that depict this motif in a different way. Although they do not feature Enoch or his city explicitly, there is a recurring theme in some of the ancient texts that corresponds to the idea of a priestly figure who leads a community of priests in an ascension into the heavenly realm. In fact, this concept has become so apparent to me in the research that I have done that I must limit my analysis here to just a few representative examples. We observe that the Epistle to the Hebrews speaks of Christians gaining access to the heavenly city, which was also referred to as Mount Zion. The Epistle to the Hebrews is structured around the idea of Jesus Christ's high priesthood after the order of Melchizedek, his ascension into heaven, and enthronement in the celestial sanctuary. The author treats at length the notion that the followers of Christ, because of his exaltation, are in like manner now able to enter the heavenly sanctuary. The exact function and use of the epistle have long been debated by scholars. Harold Attridge believed it to have been presented as an oratorical performance. This is the epistle to the Hebrews itself was performed this way. Scott Mackey refers to it as a mystical drama. As Dr. Nicholsburg mentioned in his presentation, it is very possible that the Enochic Book of Parables was originally meant to be an oral performance, an idea which he discusses in depth in the second volume of his commentary on 1st Enoch in the section entitled Orality and Performance. As Jeff Bradshaw mentioned, Dr. Welch as well has looked at this idea in depth regarding the Sermon on the Mount. Similarly, a number of scholars in recent years, including Crispin Fletcher Louis, John Dunnell, Luke Timothy Johnson, Sylvia Bunta, and others, have described Hebrews as a symbolic, participatory liturgy that moves worshipers from the profane to the sacred sphere. In other words, the epistle, or at least parts of it, was plausibly meant to have been performed or acted out. With a series of events set in the heavenly temple, which are dramatically brought to life through the use of visually oriented literary practices such as dramatized narrative with speaking actors, visual imagery, cues and commands, including directions to behold, gaze upon, draw near, and enter. Scott Mackey has attempted a reconstruction of this dramatic portrayal, which he understands to be a divine adoption ceremony. He outlines the following elements, and these are on your handout. Okay, it starts with a depiction of Jesus' ascent to heaven and entry into the celestial temple. A great high priest that is passed into the heavens, It says in 2:14, Christ has entered into heaven itself. Then comes a dramatic reenactment of the Son's exaltation in chapters 1 and 2. Now see Jesus crowned with glory and honor, and God saying, sit at my right hand. There's a declaration of familiar relationship between the Father and the Son, which Mackey calls a naming ritual. Thou art my Son, this day have I begotten thee. The Son confers this family membership on the community. They are his siblings. Christ is the older brother. And lastly, the community is provided access to the heavenly temple by Jesus, their high priest. They are exhorted to boldly enter the heavenly sanctuary and draw near to God's throne. Upon entry into the heavens, the Christian community hears the declaration, which I quoted earlier. Ye are come unto Mount Zion, and into the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to an immeasurable company of angels, to the general assembly of the firstborn, and so on. According to Mackey, all of this would have been performed by actors or described in a way that the participants could vividly imagine themselves as being in the heavenly temple and visualize Christ on his throne, and so on. I would also note here that Hebrews 6:13-18 indicates that the participants are the recipients of promises or covenants from God, which are associated with the Abrahamic covenant. The confirmation of the divine oath with these heirs of promise serves to give them hope. Verse 18 indicates that those who have received this covenant have fled in order to take hold upon the hope set before them. There is perhaps a comparison that we can make here between the idea that the community has fled and the statement in Moses 7:69 that Zion is fled. Importantly, the church that can be found in this city on Mount Zion is actually the church of the firstborns, plural in the Greek. Verses 19-20 of Hebrews 6 tell of the hope that the community holds dear. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It enters the innermost sanctuary behind the veil, where Jesus, our forerunner, has entered on our behalf. He has become a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Summarizing his findings regarding this ritualized ascent, Mackey concludes, Hebrews depicts Jesus' exaltation as involving an ascent. As he passed through the heavens and entered into heaven itself, he is also said to be leading many children into this same glory he possesses. Most importantly, the two key exhortations in chapter 4 and chapter 10 both commend an act of entry that follows and imitates Jesus' own heavenly ascent and passage through the curtain. Therefore, a mystical heavenly ascent of the whole community would appear to be envisioned. Indeed, as Dr. Jack Welch recently reminded me, Jesus himself declares as much in John chapter 14. He says, in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. As Andrew Luth has argued, those Christians who embark on the mystical journey to reach God do so not individually, but as a community, as a body of Christ. A number of scholars have picked up on the similarity between the Epistle to the Hebrews and a collection of hymns found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran and also the Jewish fortress of Masada. This collection is known as the Songs of the Sabbath Sacrifice, or the Angelic Liturgy, as Dr. Nicholsburg referred to, and consists of 13 songs meant to be sung or recited on each of the first Sabbaths of the year. Although these texts are highly fragmentary, which makes their content and their purpose difficult to establish, they appear to have been designed to take worshipers on a tour through the heavenly realms, introduce them to the angelic priesthood and the songs they sing in praise of God, guide them through the heavenly temple, and depict a vision of the glorious throne of God. Carol Newsom, one of the foremost authorities on the songs, suggests that the recitation of these Sabbath songs was a major vehicle for the experience of communion with the angels, and that the recitation of these songs is intended as a communal experience of the human worshiping community that gives the participants a sense of being in the heavenly temple and in the presence of angelic priests and worshipers. James Davila argues that these songs were meant for liturgical use and refers to them as part of a weekly cultic drama. Crispin Fletcher Lewis sees the songs as a conductor's score for not merely a descriptive heavenly tour, but a more concrete, ritualized heavenly ascent. What we see in these texts should be considered the ritual exaltation of the human community to heaven, where they experience a vision of God's throne and are transformed into an angelified or deified state. Scott Mackey and Philip Alexander specifically refer to the songs as implying a communal heavenly ascent. As there is not time to enter into an in-depth description of the content of the songs, I just quote here from Alexander's analysis. He says, the communal chanting of these numinous hymns on successive Sabbaths was apparently deemed sufficient to carry the earthly worshipers up to the celestial temple, through the nave and into the sanctuary, and set them before the throne of God. Songs of the Sabbath sacrifice implies a communal ascent. If one makes the ascent, then one does so in a group. The self-glorification hymn, which is another similar text found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, however, seems to imply that some individuals within the community, like Enoch and Levi and other great spiritual heroes of the past, had made the ascent on their own. Such individual ascent was probably the exception rather than the rule. Professor Alexander goes on to suggest that the leader of this liturgy, much like Enoch, would likely have already made the ascent himself and would be thus qualified to lead his congregation into the celestial realm. We can see here a parallel between Enoch and Melchizedek of the Joseph Smith revelations, Jesus in Hebrews, and the leader of the Sabbath songs. The leader in each document we have looked at gains access to the heavenly temple through his faithfulness, and then is able to lead his followers in that same path of ascent. Okay. Another common theme throughout these is the priesthood of Melchizedek. The name Melchizedek is arguably, as I said, found in these Dead Sea Scrolls. Through my research, I have found that this is a pattern throughout a number of texts in the Dead Sea Scrolls, as I've outlined there on the handout. And we don't have time to really go into this, but there's this pattern that I've found in my research of a leader ascending into heaven, being taught the mysteries of God, being sent back down, teaching his community these mysteries, and then the whole community is able to ascend into heaven. And this seems to be this recurring theme throughout a number of texts. I'll just close now with the following. All of these stories and texts that I've analyzed here today are about the temple and about the priesthood. The temple, the holy mountain, or the holy city is the place for ascension into heaven, whether it be literal or ritual. When there is corruption in the earthly temple, people such as the Qumran community and the early Christians are striving for this heavenly temple that is located in the heavenly city. They are trying to ascend to that heavenly community, to get back to that paradisiacal home as Enoch did, and enjoy the glory that mankind once had living in the presence of God. In Hebrews, all of the patriarchs were seeking to return to that city, and Jesus made it possible for all Christians to make it there. For the Qumran community, their religious practices gave them the experience of being there, praising God among the angels. For Joseph Smith, Enoch and his people set the pattern for others to follow. Thank you very much.